The marble steps of the Lincoln Memorial still bore the bloodstains when the news broke across every screen in America. Marcus Blackwell III didn't just assault a man, he assaulted a symbol. At 28 years old, the heir to the Blackwell tech fortune had everything: a penthouse in Manhattan, a fleet of exotic cars, and the arrogance that comes from never hearing the word no. But on that humid June evening in Washington, D.C., his sense of invincibility would lead him down a path he never imagined. Retired Marine Corps Sergeant James Crawford, 73, had been visiting the memorial with his grandson. The decorated veteran of 2 tours in Vietnam wore his faded USMC cap with quiet pride. When Marcus's Ferrari nearly struck the child in the crosswalk, Sergeant Crawford did what any grandfather would do. He raised his voice in protest. What happened next was captured on 17 cell phones. Marcus emerged from his vehicle, designer sunglasses reflecting the setting sun, and approached the elderly veteran with a sneer that would soon become infamous. "Do you know who I am, old man?" he shouted, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "My family donates more in a day than you made in your entire pathetic life." When Sergeant Crawford calmly replied that money doesn't give anyone the right to endanger children, Marcus shoved him hard. The veteran fell backward, his head striking the concrete with a sickening crack. His grandson's screams pierced the air. The teenager's video went viral within hours. By midnight, #JusticeForCrawford was trending worldwide. By morning, Sergeant Crawford was in intensive care with a fractured skull, broken hip, and internal bleeding. Doctors said his age made recovery uncertain. The witnesses were numerous and credible: a jogger, a tour guide, a family of tourists from Ohio, and an off-duty police officer. All told the same story: unprovoked assault on a defenseless elderly man by a privileged bully who believed his wealth made him untouchable. News anchors showed Marcus's social media posts, photos of him burning $100 bills, captions mocking peasants and nobodies. The public fury was instantaneous and absolute. Protest signs appeared outside Blackwell Tech headquarters. The company's stock plummeted. Editorial pages across the nation demanded accountability. But Marcus Blackwell III remained defiant. Released on $1 million bail that his father posted without blinking, he was photographed smirking outside his lawyer's office, flashing a peace sign to the cameras as if this were all a game. "This will blow over," he told a reporter. "It always does." The case was fast-tracked through the system, the public pressure too immense to ignore. Within weeks, it reached the highest level of federal review due to jurisdictional complexities and constitutional questions his army of lawyers had raised. The Supreme Court, in a rare move, agreed to hear arguments on the matter before sentencing. The nation watched and waited. Would justice truly be blind? Or would money and power prevail once more? But a revelation in that hallowed chamber was about to change everything, and shake the very foundations of American justice. The Supreme Court chamber was more than full. It was electric with anticipation. Every seat was occupied, every eye fixed forward. Reporters lined the walls, their notebooks ready. The families of both men sat on opposite sides of the aisle, creating an invisible divide that ran straight down the center of American justice. Justice Clarence Thomas sat in his chair, the weight of 30 years on the bench evident in the measured stillness of his presence. Known for his silence during oral arguments, he was also known for something else: an unwavering commitment to the Constitution and a personal history that made him immune to intimidation. The doors opened, and Marcus Blackwell III entered with his legal team. 5 attorneys from the most expensive firm in New York, each carrying leather briefcases that cost more than most Americans made in a month. But it was Marcus himself who drew every eye. He wore a custom Italian suit that probably cost $20,000, his hair perfectly styled, a Rolex glinting on his wrist. And on his face, that same smirk. That insufferable, entitled smirk that had enraged millions. He didn't walk, he strutted. Even here, in the highest court of the land, he carried himself like a man at a country club, not someone facing serious federal charges. Sergeant Crawford sat in a wheelchair in the front row, his grandson beside him. The veteran's face bore the yellowing remnants of bruises, a scar visible above his left eye. But his spine was straight, his bearing dignified. Justice Thomas looked down from the bench, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Blackwell," his deep voice filled the chamber. "You've been afforded the extraordinary circumstance of this hearing due to the constitutional questions raised by your counsel. Before we proceed to legal arguments, the court wishes to hear directly from you. Do you understand the severity of the charges against you?" Marcus's lead attorney started to rise, but Marcus waved him off with a dismissive hand. He stood, buttoned his jacket with theatrical flair, and addressed the court with shocking casualness. "Justice Thomas, with all due respect," the phrase dripped with condescension, "I think this whole situation has been blown completely out of proportion by the media and certain activists. What happened was an unfortunate accident. The gentleman overreacted to a simple traffic situation. I barely touched him. The fact that he's elderly and apparently fragile, well, that's not really my fault, is it?" A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Several justices exchanged glances. Justice Thomas leaned forward slightly. "You barely touched him. Is that your testimony?" "Look," Marcus continued, his confidence growing, apparently mistaking the justice's measured tone for openness to his argument. "Sergeant Crawford is a veteran. We all respect that. Very patriotic and all. But maybe at his age, he shouldn't be out creating confrontations with people. I'm a job creator. My company employs thousands. I have responsibilities. My time is valuable. Shouldn't the court consider the economic impact of derailing someone of my significance over what amounts to an accident?" The silence that followed was crushing. Justice Thomas's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a hardening, like steel being forged. "Mr. Blackwell, would you like to address Sergeant Crawford directly?" Justice Thomas asked, gesturing toward the wheelchair. Marcus barely glanced at the veteran. "Sure. Sorry you fell, sir. Hope you feel better soon. But honestly, maybe be more careful next time. Streets can be dangerous for older folks." The grandson started to stand, fury on his young face, but Sergeant Crawford placed a gentle hand on his arm, stopping him. Justice Thomas then did something unusual. He nodded toward Sergeant Crawford. "Sergeant, the court recognizes you." The veteran gripped the wheels of his chair and moved forward slightly. When he spoke, his voice was steady, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had faced real danger and real evil. "Your Honor, members of the court, I didn't come here for revenge. I came because I spent 50 years of my life believing this country stood for something. I wore the uniform. I watched friends die in rice paddies defending principles this young man seems to think don't apply to him. When he pushed me, when I fell, when my head hit that concrete, I wasn't angry. I was sad. Sad that somewhere, somehow, we raised a generation that believes wealth exempts them from basic human decency." He paused, his eyes finally meeting Marcus's. "I forgive you, son. But forgiveness doesn't mean there shouldn't be consequences. If there aren't, then everything I fought for was meaningless." Marcus rolled his eyes, actually rolled them, in the Supreme Court of the United States. Justice Thomas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He was about to speak when a figure stood in the back of the chamber, and a voice rang out, "Your Honor, may I approach the bench?" Every head turned. The tension in the room suddenly doubled. Justice Thomas looked toward the source of the voice, recognition crossing his features. "The court recognizes you. Please come forward." And then someone walked down the center aisle, someone Marcus Blackwell III never expected to see. The man who walked down the aisle was imposing in a way that had nothing to do with physical stature. Raymond Blackwell Sr. was 62, silver-haired, and dressed in a dark suit that spoke of authority rather than fashion. More importantly, Everyone in that chamber knew exactly who he was. Former FBI Director. Current Chairman of the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association. A legend in justice circles, a man who had spent 40 years building a reputation for integrity that was beyond reproach. He was also Marcus Blackwell III's father. Marcus's face went white. "Dad? What are you?" "Sit down, Marcus," Raymond said quietly, but the command in his voice was absolute. Marcus sat. Justice Thomas regarded the elder Blackwell with what might have been the hint of respect. "Mr. Blackwell, this is highly irregular. What is your purpose in addressing this court?" Raymond stood before the bench, and for a moment he simply breathed. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man making the hardest decision of his life. "Your Honor, I've spent my entire career in service of the law. I've arrested murderers, taken down crime families, stared down corrupt politicians who thought they were above justice. I did it because I still believe, that the law is the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. That it must apply equally, or it means nothing." He turned to look at his son, and the pain in his eyes was evident to everyone watching. "I raised Marcus after his mother died. I gave him everything. Maybe I gave him too much. Maybe I protected him too many times when he was younger. Maybe I told myself that youthful mistakes weren't worth ruining his future over. If that's true, then I am complicit in creating the man standing before this court today." Marcus's attorney stood. "Your Honor, Mr. Blackwell Sr. has no standing in this." "I'll allow it," Justice Thomas said simply. "Continue, Director Blackwell." Raymond reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This morning, I received a call from my son's legal team. They informed me that if I would make a statement to this court, in my capacity as former FBI director, attesting to Marcus's character and requesting leniency, it might influence the outcome. They suggested that my reputation could provide cover for a lighter sentence." He unfolded the paper. It was a prepared statement, dense with legal language designed to cast Marcus in the best possible light. "They asked me to read this." He held it up, then slowly, deliberately, tore it in half. Then in half again. The pieces fluttered to the floor of the Supreme Court like broken promises. "I won't do it." Marcus stood up, panic finally breaking through his arrogance. "Dad, what are you doing? You can't." "Sit down." Raymond's voice cracked like a whip, and Marcus collapsed back into his chair as if struck. "You don't get to speak. Not now. You've said enough." Raymond turned back to Justice Thomas, and now his voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the kind of emotion that comes from wrestling with love and duty and finding out which one must yield. "Your Honor, I love my son. God help me, I do. But I will not use my position, my reputation, or my standing to help him escape the consequences of his actions. What he did to Sergeant Crawford was reprehensible. His attitude today has been disgusting. And if this court shows him mercy he doesn't deserve, if he walks away from this without truly understanding that actions have consequences, then I will have failed him one final time." Tears were streaming down Raymond's face now, but his voice never wavered. "I ask this court not to show my son favoritism. I ask you to treat him as you would any other citizen who committed these acts. And I want him to know," he turned fully to face Marcus now, "that I will not be posting any more bail. I will not be paying any more legal fees. I will not be answering your phone calls from whatever facility you're sent to. Not until you truly understand what you've done. Not until you become the man I thought I was raising." The silence in the chamber was absolute. Several people in the gallery were crying openly. Justice Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying both father and son. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of history. "Mr. Blackwell, Director Blackwell, the court appreciates your candor. I suspect this was not easy. "Nothing worth doing ever is, Your Honor," Raymond replied. Justice Thomas then looked directly at Marcus, and his gaze was like judgment itself. "Mr. Blackwell the younger, I've sat on this bench for over 3 decades. I've seen almost every variation of human behavior, every justification, every excuse. I've watched wealthy defendants think they could buy their way out of consequences. I've seen powerful people mistake their status for immunity. And I've seen what happens to societies when we allow that kind of thinking to prevail." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But I've also seen something else. I've seen people change. I've seen redemption. I've seen arrogance give way to wisdom, entitlement give way to gratitude. The question before this court is not whether you deserve mercy. The question is whether this system can still produce justice, true justice, that serves both punishment and transformation." Justice Thomas looked to his fellow justices, then back to the chamber. "This court will adjourn for 1 hour to deliberate on sentencing. But Mr. Blackwell, understand this. Your father has shown more courage in the last 5 minutes than you've shown in your entire life. I suggest you spend this hour contemplating whether you want to spend the rest of your life proving him right or proving him wrong." As the justices filed out, Raymond Blackwell turned to leave. As he passed his son, Marcus reached out weakly. "Dad, please." Raymond stopped, looked down at his son's hand, and then at his face. "When you're ready to be a man, Marcus, I'll be there. But not before." And he walked out, leaving his son truly alone for the first time in his privileged life. When the justices returned, the atmosphere in the Supreme Court chamber had fundamentally changed. Marcus Blackwell III sat hunched in his chair, the smirk gone, replaced by something that looked like the first glimmers of genuine fear, and perhaps understanding. Justice Clarence Thomas surveyed the courtroom before speaking, his presence commanding absolute attention. "In the matter before this court, we have considered not only the facts of the assault but the broader implications for justice in this nation. Mr. Blackwell, please stand." Marcus rose unsteadily, his expensive lawyers flanking him, though they suddenly seemed far less confident. "This court finds you guilty of aggravated assault on a senior citizen, assault causing grievous bodily harm, and reckless endangerment of a minor. These are federal charges due to the location of the crime and jurisdictional matters. The sentencing guidelines provide significant latitude." Justice Thomas paused, and his next words would become national headlines within minutes. "You are hereby sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 3 years. You will serve this time in general population, not in any special facility. You are additionally sentenced to 2,000 hours of community service, to be completed after your release, working specifically with elderly veterans in VA hospitals and care facilities." Marcus's knees buckled slightly. One of his attorneys caught his arm. But Justice Thomas wasn't finished. "Furthermore, you are ordered to pay full restitution for all of Sergeant Crawford's medical expenses, pain and suffering, and loss of quality of life, the amount to be determined by separate proceedings but estimated to exceed $2 million. You are also fined $5 million, to be paid to a fund supporting veterans' services." The justice leaned forward, his voice taking on an even more serious tone. "But here is what I want you to understand, Mr. Blackwell. This sentence is not about vengeance. It's about transformation. The Bureau of Prisons has programs, education, counseling, vocational training. You will participate in all of them. You will learn what it means to live without privilege, without shortcuts, without your family name protecting you. You will learn what thousands of Americans who've made mistakes already know, that redemption is possible, but only through genuine change." He paused, letting that sink in. "And understand this, millions of Americans will be watching whether you emerge from this experience bitter and defiant or humble and transformed. The choice is entirely yours." Justice Thomas then did something unexpected. He looked directly at Sergeant Crawford. "Sergeant, does the victim wish to address the court?" The elderly Marine wheeled himself forward with the help of his grandson. When he spoke, his voice was stronger than it had been before. "Your Honor, I want to thank this court for proving that justice still means something in this country. But I want to say something to Marcus." He turned his wheelchair to face the young man directly. "Son, I meant what I said about forgiveness. I do forgive you. But now you have to do the hard part. You have to forgive yourself by becoming someone worth forgiving. Use this time. Don't waste it on anger or resentment. My grandson is watching how you handle this. Millions of young people are watching. Show them that even when we fall, we can get back up as better people. That's what I learned in the Marines. That's what I'm asking you to learn now." There was no trace of bitterness in his words, only a veteran's understanding that everyone fights their own battles, and some people just need to learn how. Marcus looked at the sergeant, and for the first time, genuine emotion broke through. Tears streamed down his face. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." "I know, son," Sergeant Crawford replied softly. "Now prove it." As the marshals moved forward to take Marcus into custody, Raymond Blackwell Sr. stood in the back of the courtroom. His son's eyes found his father's across the distance. Raymond placed his hand over his heart in a gesture that said everything words couldn't. "I love you. But this is necessary. Be strong." Marcus nodded, understanding for the first time that his father's greatest act of love was refusing to save him from himself. As he was led away, Justice Thomas added one final statement that would be quoted in law schools for generations. "Let it be known that in this chamber, wealth means nothing, status means nothing, power means nothing. Only the law matters. And the law does not bow to anyone." Epilogue. 18 months later. The visiting room at FCI Cumberland was nothing like Marcus Blackwell III had ever experienced in his former life. Bare concrete walls, metal tables bolted to the floor, the smell of industrial cleaning solution mixing with anxiety and hope. Raymond Blackwell Sr. sat across from his son, and if someone who knew them before had walked in, they might not have recognized the young man. Marcus had lost 30 pounds, most of it from his face, making his features sharper, more defined. His hands bore calluses from working in the prison workshop. But the most dramatic change was in his eyes. The arrogance had been replaced by something else. Awareness. Humility. Maybe even wisdom. "You look good, son," Raymond said quietly. "I feel different, Dad," Marcus replied. "I've been taking college courses, criminal justice, actually. I'm also facilitating a discussion group for younger inmates about choices and consequences. And I've been writing." "Writing what?" "Letters. I've written to Sergeant Crawford every week. He writes back. He tells me about his grandson, about his time in the Marines, about what it means to serve something bigger than yourself. I'm learning, Dad. I'm actually learning." Raymond reached across the table, and for the first time in 18 months, touched his son's hand. "I'm proud of you, Marcus. I know that sounds strange, given where we are. But I'm prouder of you now than I ever was when you were living in that penthouse, thinking the world owed you everything." Marcus's voice cracked. "I wasted so much time being angry at you for not protecting me. It took me months to understand that not protecting me was protecting me. You saved my life, Dad. You saved my soul." In the corner of the visiting room, a young man in his 20s was meeting with his mother for the first time in years. He kept glancing over at Marcus and Raymond, and during a lull in his own conversation, he approached their table nervously. "Excuse me, sir," he said to Marcus. "I just wanted to say, I've been to your discussion group. What you said last week about how the hardest person to forgive is yourself. That really helped me. Thank you." After the young man left, Raymond smiled at his son. "You're making a difference, even in here." "I've got a long way to go," Marcus said. "But for the first time in my life, I'm not running from consequences. I'm learning from them. 3 years later. The Walter Reed National Military Medical Center was bustling with activity, but in the rehabilitation wing, a small ceremony was taking place. Marcus Blackwell III, now 33 years old and having completed his prison sentence 6 months earlier, stood beside Sergeant James Crawford in front of a plaque being unveiled on the wall. The inscription read, "The Crawford Blackwell Veterans Rehabilitation Fund, because every fall can lead to rising stronger." Marcus had used half of his trust fund to establish the foundation. He now worked there full-time, earning a modest salary, living in a one-bedroom apartment in Alexandria, driving a used Honda. His father stood in the back of the room, tears in his eyes, watching his son help an elderly veteran in a wheelchair maneuver closer to see the plaque. Sergeant Crawford, now 77 but remarkably recovered, stood at the podium with the aid of a cane. "5 years ago," the sergeant said to the assembled crowd of veterans, families, and media, "a young man made the worst mistake of his life and hurt me badly. Today, that same man has helped us create something that will help thousands of veterans recover their strength and dignity. If anyone ever asks you whether people can change, whether redemption is real, you tell them about Marcus Blackwell. You tell them that justice without the possibility of transformation is just revenge. And revenge heals nothing." When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he kept it brief. "I stood in the Supreme Court 5 years ago and thought I was above consequences. I was wrong about everything. Justice Thomas told me that millions of people would watch whether I became bitter or better. I hope I'm proving that better is possible. I'm grateful for the hard lessons. I'm grateful for a father who loved me enough to let me fall. And I'm grateful to Sergeant Crawford, who showed me that true strength isn't about never falling down, it's about how you get back up and who you help up with you." As the small ceremony concluded, Raymond approached his son. They embraced, the kind of embrace that speaks of journeys completed and relationships rebuilt from the ashes of old mistakes. "Your mother would be proud," Raymond said. "I hope so," Marcus replied. "I'm finally becoming the man she thought I could be." Across the room, Sergeant Crawford's grandson, now a freshman at Georgetown studying law, was filming the ceremony on his phone. The video would go viral, but this time for all the right reasons. The caption would read, "From Supreme Court to Supreme Redemption, a story of justice, accountability, and transformation." Because sometimes the hardest sentences lead to the most beautiful freedom. And sometimes justice isn't just about punishment. It's about proving that even the most arrogant can learn humility, even the most entitled can learn gratitude, and even the most broken can be rebuilt into something stronger and more beautiful than before. The law had held. Consequences had been enforced. And a soul had been saved. Justice, in the end, had not just been served, it had transformed.